Hello and welcome back to the Do Brand You channel. And today it is the In Conversation with Time with Bailey Lang. I'm so excited, Bailey, to have you with us. So a very warm welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Yes, I'm super excited to be here.
Cool. So for those of you that might have popped new onto this channel, Do Brand You is all about you. It's about unleashing your potential in every season of life. And if you stay on and listen, you're going to see how Bailey has been able to do that. So a little bit about Bailey. She's actually a doctor. We should call her Dr. Bailey. And looking forward to hearing about the study that you've done and the university that you've been through. But she is the founder of the Writing Desk, and she is a writer, an editor, and a coach who provides content marketing and strategy, ghostwriting, and one-on-one author support. She is passionate about helping writers build sustainable, enjoyable writing habits and to get their books from draft to done. That is so exciting. So, Bailey, can you just take us back to your childhood? What was it about writing and books that got you excited in this field?
Oh, it's such a good question. I started reading really, really early. I have always loved books and writing and stories. I had a wonderful teacher in the first grade who she would have like art supplies, paper, fancy book covers, and you were just allowed to you could write a book, it would be bound, you could decorate the cover. And that was kind of the first time that I realized all these books that I love and am reading, people write those. That's a thing you can do. And so that just it kind of sparked even more of that, you can tell these stories, you can create these things. And that's just always been there ever since that. That same teacher also recognized that I was reading at an advanced level, and she made sure that I had access to books that were challenging me, that were, helping me keep up with the skills that I was developing. So from really, really early on, books have always just been a huge part of my life. And then words as part of that. I got really into spelling bees in middle school. So I competed in the National Spelling Bee twice. And then I went on to, so I was very, very into words. And then I actually ended up judging and pronouncing at the county and regional level for, way longer than I competed, 15 years, 20 years. I think I was continuing to be involved with the spelling bee. So words and writing and stories have always been a huge part of my life.
That is so cool. I'm like the sideline artist or like author, I suppose, and that I love and artwork. I love to go to museums and to look at it. I appreciate artists. I love going to the shows, and it's the same with writing. I love really good writing and people that can really use words. I wouldn't say I'm so good at it, but I appreciate it so much. So when you, so that kind of took you on a journey then to define who you were through what you chose to study. And take us through that journey.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree is in creative writing. I went into that with no real idea of what I wanted to do as a career. After that, I was like, I will write, and surely there will be money attached to that. And as anyone who writes figures out eventually, that's not always the case. But that was where I started, was with that creative writing degree, which I loved. And after that, I worked in marketing for a few years, got a job out of college, first doing phone interviews and then moving into a marketing role. And that involved a lot of writing. So it was super fun. But there was something still kind of missing from that. So there was a new master's program at a university in the town that I lived in, and it was in rhetoric and writing studies. I did not know what the rhetoric thing meant at the time, but I was like, writing studies sounds kind of cool. So started the master's program, completely fell in love with with that field. Rhetoric and writing studies just really, really lit me up. It's a very interesting way of thinking about communication, how we persuade people, how we interpret texts of various kinds. And by the time I was done with that degree, I realized that I was super in love with my field and not so much in love with my job anymore. So at that point, and I had, I had faculty members who really encouraged me. They were like, you're really good at this. You're doing a lot of writing. I'd written a book by that point. They were like, you should really think about a PhD in the field. And so I took that plunge. I quit my full-time job and started a PhD program. And that took me from 2017 to 2021. That was a 4-year program. So I finished that kind of in the thick of the early COVID years, which was a super interesting experience. But continued, very much being in love with rhetoric and writing studies as a field, as a way of interpreting text and thinking about writing. And then by the time I finished that degree, I was like, I don't think I'm going to stay in academia, though. So I loved my time in my program. But by the time I was done, I was super burned out. I was really, really burned out. Writing a dissertation during a pandemic is challenging. I also finished my dissertation, graduated, and then a month after that, I got married. So I was like, that was a really busy year. Yeah. So it was, I was super burned out, and I had been freelancing all through my program to supplement my stipend. So in the US, graduate program stipends, particularly in the humanities, are not enough to live on. So I had been picking up freelance writing and editing gigs for all 4 years. And I was having a lot of success with that. I was having a really good time with the companies and the people that I was working with. I was getting to use everything that I was learning in my program to help people and see kind of that immediate impact. So I talked to my husband and I said, hey, give me a year. Let me try to start a company. And if it doesn't work out, like, I will go get a job. Like I'll figure something else out. And that was 3 years ago, and here we still are. So.
Oh my gosh. That is, I just love that. And I would love to now kind of dive into that whole side of you've just showcased the seasons of life that you've moved through, even including a marriage and including a season of COVID and all of this. Yeah. And can you kind of help us to understand your mindset? I mean, was there that fear there of, oh my gosh, am I crazy for giving up a full-time job? Shouldn't I go back to work? Because I know, So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I went from making a pretty decent salary. I had been in my job for 5 years by the time I left. So, full-time job, benefits, salary, all of that, to, I think my stipend was $15,000 a year, which is like, that's not enough to live on. That's hardly any money at all. And I was determined that I was not going to go back into student loan debt. So I was very lucky, incredibly lucky and privileged in that I had already paid off all of my undergraduate student loans by the time I started my graduate studies. So I had no debt other than, like, I had a newish car. And that gave me a lot of freedom at that time to say, okay, I can afford to leave this full-time job and do this kind of risky thing and see what happens. My family's very supportive. I have a lot of safety nets. I have a lot of privilege that other people don't, that I could take that risk and know that if it all kind of fell apart, I wasn't going to be homeless, right? I wasn't going to be completely out of options at that point. So it was a risk that I felt really comfortable taking. But there are absolutely times where it's like, was that the right call? It's academic life is precarious. It's scary. It's not super well paid. And then same with jumping into starting my own business after that. I had a lot of people in academic spaces, even though most people who get a PhD don't end up in a full-time tenure track position, people think it's bizarre when you step away from academia. And it's scary to start a business and say, this is how I'm going to make my income. This is the risk that I'm choosing to take. It's absolutely terrifying, but that's part of what makes it rewarding when it works.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how you talk about, that how you were able to manage your like finances, because I know I work with people coaching them, and I know people listening to the channel are in the same situation. They have a job, they have a, they're in their career, but they've got that side hustle, and there's this dream that one day that side hustle would eventuate into something. And I'd just like for you to talk a little bit about how, your mindset on getting those student loans, covered so you didn't have that debt, just that financial side, because the word that you shared was freedom. By
Mhm.
managing that finances and that debt, you provided freedom for yourself.
Yeah. So when I graduated from college the first time, so that would have been 2011, I did not have a ton of debt. I finished my undergraduate degree in 3 years, so that saved me a lot of money. I was incredibly lucky in that I got a full-time job relatively quickly. And the part-time job that I had before that also paid like $30 an hour. So I super, super lucky right off the bat. I lived at home for probably a year after I graduated. I paid rent to
Yeah.
move back in with my parents, but my cost of living was super low. And
Yeah.
I have always been kind of a saver. I am the only thing I spend a ton of money on is books. And so basically every spare penny that I had, I just used to plug away at my debt. And that, I didn't have super high interest debt, and I just made it, that was like my number one priority for several years until it was gone.
Yeah.
And that opened up a lot of
That
other opportunities. Yeah.
I think it's such a really important thing, because even I have, adult daughters, and, impressing upon them this whole concept of staying out of debt. And it actually provides you freedom. It gives you choices later on. And you can always get to that stage of doing that. Yeah, that is so exciting. So can you lead us through a few of your steps of this whole season of life of now? That moment where you say, okay, I am leaving, and people are telling me I'm crazy, but I'm not going to listen to that noise. And here I am. I'm probably at home. I'm creating a home office. And yeah, this is where my work life is going to happen. Can you take us back to that time?
Yeah, that was in a different home office than the one that I am in now. We have moved in the intervening period. So I wrote my whole dissertation in this office. I started my business in this office. That office was also where I played video games. It was where we stored a lot of stuff in our house. It was kind of the only extra room that we had in the house that we were renting at that time. It was very tiny,
Right.
and by the time we moved out of it, I was like, I need an office that I can leave at the end of the day and not be in until the
Yeah.
next workday. So that's the space that I'm in
Yeah.
now. Emotionally, at that time, I was so burned out after finishing my dissertation.
Right.
I was so very burned out. And I knew that I needed work that was going to help me start to refill that cup creatively,
Mm,
emotionally, energetically, that was going to support
right.
me in getting my energy back, basically. And so I started looking
Yeah.
for people to work with who were kind of on that same wavelength, people who had really interesting projects that I could kind of dig into and work with them over a long period of time. So I ghostwritten a couple of books. I did a couple of long-term editing projects. I had wonderful clients and companies that I worked for over a period of years, sometimes doing, sometimes simple, sometimes very complex tasks. But all of it was stuff that was at a much more gentle pace. And I knew, even as I was starting this business and I wanted to hit the ground running, and my goal was to hit a certain income number to prove that it was viable, I also knew that it needed to be viable for me at like a nervous system level. I needed to be healthy enough to do the work. So that's been
Right.
something that I'm still sort of figuring out what the right balance is after 3 years. I think that's a kind of an ongoing negotiation with the business, but it is something that
Yeah.
I've tried to really keep at the forefront, because I know I was so burned out at one point, and that's not a space that I want to go back to.
Yeah. Can you share maybe one or two things that you could offer to those listening who are in that position of either getting to the point of starting a business, or they are starting, just some like things like, I'm really glad I did that, or next time, if I had to do it over again, I would do this.
Yeah, give yourself as much of a runway as you can. So at the time, my
Yeah.
husband and I, like, we had a robust emergency fund. We still do. And that is something that gives me a lot of psychological safety to know that, okay, if,
Mm,
the internet blows up like it did last week, and, half the internet shuts down and I can't work, or, some plumbing blows up in our house, which happened earlier this year. Like, we have money to deal with the stuff that comes up in life,
right.
because trying to start a business and trying to run your life, which
Yeah.
takes money, can be very, very scary, especially early on if you don't know where all of your clients are coming from. So save up
Right.
3 to 6 months of living expenses if you can, especially if you're leaving a full-time job. Give yourself that safety net, because it makes a huge, huge difference. And
Yeah.
I think the other big thing that I talk to, especially a lot of freelance writers, about people who are kind of stepping into freelance editing and writing, the hourly rate that you would get from a job is not the hourly rate that you need to charge as a freelancer. I don't even like charging hourly rates as a freelancer because it doesn't usually make sense. Um, but you have to keep in mind, when you are starting to sell your services or your products, that the money that a company would pay you, they're also covering things like taxes, health insurance, benefits, vacation, right? Now you have to fund all of that stuff. So you need to set your prices
Right.
accordingly. That's a lesson that took me a little bit of time to learn. And it's something that I see a lot of people kind of fumble around in, especially when they're just starting out, because it's easy to feel like, ooh, $25 an hour sounds like a decent amount of money. Not when a third of that is going to
Yeah.
go to taxes, right? That it gets eaten away really, really fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to figure out your numbers pretty quick.
That's such good advice too. Would you have one like real success point that you would say that you can celebrate from this starting your business and being where you are now?
Oh gosh, a lot, which is nice. I think for me personally,
Yeah.
I have really overcome a lot of like workaholic tendencies, that's what a lot of what
Yeah.
contributed to burnout by the time I was finishing my dissertation and my PhD. So getting to a place where I feel like I have a more balanced relationship with my work,
Yeah.
and where my work serves my life and not the other way around, that to me is
Yeah.
that's my North Star all the time, right? That is my number one marker
Yeah.
of success. It's also been really, really beautiful for me to see so many of my clients go on to start doing super cool things. So I have coaching
Yeah.
clients who have overcome enormous periods of struggle and writer's block to enter periods of enormous productivity and joy. I have clients who've published books, who are actively in talks with agents and publishers, who have
Wow.
self-published and have, experienced really good success with that. And seeing their work out in the world is also, it's so, so cool to me. I have so this shelf up behind me at the top, a lot of what is there, that's client work, and I have a number of others that are, ebook only or virtual products. But seeing those things that is super, super cool. That helps keep me going as well.
I just love that. And it fits so well what you were saying about how you were able to get like managing how much work you're doing. And, I always say this is the Do Brand You channel. It's not about do, but like you said, you were able to manage that have to work ethic that we have. We find our identity. We find our success through the work that we do, and we're always doing. But yeah, my take on it as well is to do brand you, is to take those pauses, to create that rhythm in your life that allows you to live at your best potential. So, Bailey, we had conversations before this call, and you shared with me that running your solo business, that you also were battling a late diagnosed neurodivergent situation. So, can we just dive into that? And first of all, I appreciate you sharing this with us, but I know that it's through these conversations that it inspires and motivates other people. But can you share with us, what is neurodivergency?
Yeah, so neurodivergence means that's what happens when your brain varies from what is considered typical, right? So you have neurotypical and you have neurodivergent. So these are two different types of brains, basically. And the neurodivergent umbrella includes things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Down syndrome, Tourette, all sorts of things that are commonly considered disorders or disabilities. But under the neurodivergence and neurodiversity model, are considered normal variations of how human brains function. And
Right.
the terminology I know can be confusing and new for people. It's always changing. Typically, the way people understand it now is a person can be neurodivergent, right? Or neurotypical if you are not neurodivergent. People as a whole demonstrate neurodiversity. So you wouldn't want to say of a person, well, that person's neurodiverse, right? You would say that person is neurodivergent. And that's just one that I see, like, people feel confused sometimes about how to use that terminology.
Right. Mm. And so you were sharing as well that this is something that you weren't aware of. And then it, because it was a late diagnosis. So when were you diagnosed, and how was that experience for you to be diagnosed and to realize, wow, I need to move forward differently?
Yeah. So I actually did not receive anything approaching a diagnosis until about a year ago. I had what
Wow.
is sometimes referred to in neurodivergent spaces as my self-discovery about 3 years ago. So it's been a long journey of kind of knowing what that diagnosis was going to be, and
Wow.
then getting to a point where I was working with someone who could actually work through those assessments with me and say, yep, you were right. So what happened
Oh,
for
wow.
me, yeah, it was the way that this journey started, I think, is funny, but not. It's one of those stories. So I was reading a book. It's a romance novel. It's called The Heart Principle. It's the third book in a series by a woman named Helen Huang. They're wonderful books. And I finished reading The Heart Principle, and I realized that I was sobbing, which is not generally the reaction that I have when finishing a romance novel. And so I was like, what's happening? What's happening there, bud? Why are you crying about this book? And this is like right around the time that I'd finished my PhD, shortly after that. And I was realizing that one of the main characters in this book is an extremely burned out autistic woman. And I was like, I have never seen myself represented so accurately in a book before.
Wow.
And I was like,
Wow.
that probably means something. And so at the end of this book, the author includes a bunch of resources and other books
Wow.
about autism in women. And I kind of fell down that rabbit hole. I read absolutely every book that I could get my hands on, starting with Aspergirls by Rudy Simone. And as I was reading that, I stopped and I went and I got a sheet of notebook paper and I made 2 columns on it. And I was like, here are all the things that fit and here are all the things that don't. Because I was like, I'm really trying to puzzle this out. And the column of things that fit filled the whole front of the page and a good section of the back of the page. And the section of things that didn't was like this much. And
Oh my gosh.
as I'm reading it, my husband is going, what are you writing? Like, what are you doing? And I was like, I need some space to process this. Like, let me finish this and then I will talk to you about it. And so I finished reading this book and I was like, wow, I think I'm autistic. And so I gave him this paper and I was like, this is what I have been reading. This is, what's going on. And he was like, huh, interesting. And he read it and he was like, yeah, that all makes sense. And so I just kind of continued down that rabbit hole of, reading absolutely every book I could get my hands on, everything from clinical texts and studies to memoirs, anything that I could find. And feeling more and more certain in kind of that self-understanding. And it wasn't until a little over a year ago that I found a therapist who specializes in working with late diagnosed autistic people, and started working with her. And I was like, hey, this is my suspicion. Can we kind of work through some assessments and talk through that? So we went through, there are some diagnostic like questionnaires and things that you can do for assessment. They're very reliable. They're very problematic. There's a lot of big feelings about them in autistic spaces for many, many good reasons.
Right.
And at the end of that, she was like, yeah, all of your results point to the fact that your self-understanding on this was very accurate. So that
Wow.
has been a really, really interesting journey of kind of looking back at different points in my life and going, oh, that makes so much more sense now. If I had known this about myself 20 years ago, what might have been different, right? Or what would have stayed very much the same? It's a really, really life-altering experience. For me, it's been almost unequivocally positive because it gives me so much more context and understanding of what's going on with my nervous system, my body, my brain, what I need to function at a really high level, and why in other spaces without those supports that I now give myself, I ended up feeling really burned out, right? Or struggling needlessly.
Right.
It's been incredibly, incredibly enlightening and cool to kind of figure out this thing about myself that has always been, there's something there, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't have the word for it.
Right.
And now I do.
Yeah. What I really, connected with your story on is you're talking about reading that romance novel. It was Helen Long, is that right?
Helen Wong, yes.
Wong, and how she used just a fiction romance book to represent a whole population of people. And, like for you can read that romance novel and find representation for yourself. But like, even for myself, I can read that and understand people that are like that. And that would go for anything. It's really the power of writing. I always say everyone has a book in them, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, I have a book I want to write. And yeah, I always encourage, you need to write.
Yes.
Definitely. There'll be links below here for Bailey. If you're on that writing journey, you need to connect with her.
Please, I would love that.
And find, be one of those books that sit on her bookshelf behind her, for sure. So we're actually running out of time, and I wish we could talk a lot more. But I do want to ask, can you share now that you with this finding out that you were neurodivergent, and now you have a business? And you've found a real positive sense, because now you can understand, like me, if just tell me what the problem is and I can manage it. The
Right.
unknowing, the fog is what's hard for me. So what were some things that you found as a business owner that you were able to implement that have really helped in this neurodivergent way that you work and live?
Yeah, it's, oh my gosh, that list is so long. So I have a lot of sensory sensitivities, right? So I'm very sensitive to certain sounds, different types of light. So you'll notice I have a light on behind me instead of above me. I do not like overhead lights, do not like fluorescent lights. So I'm really careful about kind of what sorts of noise are happening in my space. I often wear like earplugs or headphones while I'm working to kind of control some of that. I'm really careful. I'm very boundaried with my schedule. So my energy is much more limited than sometimes I might like, right? There are times where I would love to be able to work flat out all day, but I know that I can't.
Yeah.
And I know that if I try and I push through that, I will pay for it for the next several days. So being really careful to manage my energy makes a huge difference. It allows me to be way more productive than I would be if I was trying to force myself to work longer hours. I do things like I have this
Yeah.
little ring. It's like a little fidget thing, and I use it when I am on calls. It keeps me grounded. So I have like anxiety and other kind of, I get fidgety when I talk. And so this really helps me kind of feel calm and centered in my body. So small things like that, they make an enormous difference in what I'm able to get done. And there's research that shows that autistic people can be up to 140% as productive as neurotypical people if we're given the supports that we need to do really good work. So that's something that I try to keep in mind too, is like, even on a bad day, if I give myself these supports, I'm probably going to get quite a lot done because I can be very, very focused.
Wow, that is so many good tips in there. And what I love about it as we finish up as well is that, again, it's do brand you. And I go back to that because it's you not trying to feel bad because you can't be like other people, it's about you managing your space, your time, your boundaries, and accepting you fully for who you are. And because you do that, you then can live within your potential. So inspiring, honestly. Can you share a quote? This is always the last thing I ask of our guests that come on. What is a quote that has meant something to you?
Yes, I'd love to. And I have this one pulled out. I think it aligns really nicely with kind of what we've been talking about here. So this is from Dr. Devin Price's book, Unmasking Autism, which is a great read, highly recommended. And in it, he writes, recovery is predicated on aligning your life with your values, and you aren't going to be able to align anything until you know who you are. And that has been so
Wow.
true of my experience. I think true of whether you are autistic or neurotypical or anything else. I think that is just a really good piece of advice to live by.
That is, I love that. I love that. And what's the name of the guy again?
Dr. Devin Price.
Dr. Devin Price. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bailey, thank you so much for just being vulnerable and sharing with us about your journey, your passion, and your purpose just shine through in everything that you say. I will be sharing links below, so do get in touch with Bailey. And thank you again for coming here and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.